Thanks so much, and welcome to today's webinar. We've got three very talented speakers with us today. Chris Riley, a technologist, research analyst, O'Reilly author, and subject matter expert on DevOps. He's also a regular contributor to the Sauce blog and a contributor to many of our white papers. We have Andy Pemberton, Senior Director of Solution Architecture at CloudBees, who focuses on educating users on continuous delivery with CloudBees Jenkins platform. And Abhijit Pendal, a solutions engineer at Sauce Labs with over 5 years of testing experience at Sauce, and also our expert who will be able to answer many of the technical details about how to use Sauce Labs and the best way to optimize it. We have a short poll that we'd like our users to participate in to give us some idea as to their level of experience. So if you take about 30 seconds and fill this out, we'll get started with Chris.
All right. Hello, everybody. I'm super excited to be here today. And I want to say thank you to Sauce Labs and CloudBees for inviting me to join this webinar. I would ask you to give them a hand, but unfortunately I won't be able to hear you. However, if you want to indulge the people around you, I think they would enjoy that in the middle of their day. So we're going to let everybody fill out this poll here just to get an idea of who you are, because by the end of this webinar, we're all going to be very, very good, close friends. And I see that the poll has ended here, and it looks like we have a lot of really interesting results. So I appreciate that. While we wait for the results to pop up, I want to just give you a sense of what we're going to cover here today. We are here to talk about continuous integration. So we'll do some basic definitions on what CI is, how CI extends beyond releases, changing the impression of what the technology does for organizations. I'm going to look at a new set of challenges, and then I am between you and some great demos and conversations about two of my tools that I really like, Sauce Labs and Jenkins. And then finally, we'll go into the extra credit for CI and some Q&A. The results are in, and this is interesting. We actually have a little bit different than I expected. We have a large audience that already has integration environments and quite a variation on the types of testing. So that's great to see. Thank you for that. All right. So let's continue on here. I am going to start with the definition of CI, which seems maybe a little silly, especially given the results of the survey. A lot of you know what CI is. But I think it's important, and I'll explain why. Obviously, continuous integration is the process of doing regular automated builds to some sort of integration environment. And it's also the place where you do both automated and manual testing. I don't think manual testing is necessarily going away, but you want to take up as much as you can with automated testing. The other thing that I like about CI is that really any company can benefit from it. There's some unique scenarios around line of business application development that maybe don't fit, but most companies can benefit from them. I've been told that there's an upper limit to being a nerd, and I'll spare you the actual conversation, but I'm sure that being really excited about a process and software quality is somewhere near that. But for me, I've always been into process automation, and I've lived the dark days of waterfall development, and I've also been a part of and seen environments that have really leveraged the technology to take the next steps. And so CI, it's not just this definition here. It's not just a tactical thing. CI flows into the world of DevOps, which DevOps is a framework. And this also means that you're not going to wake up one morning and say, I have mastered continuous integration. It's a process. You will always be optimizing your pipeline, and you should be, because you're always trying to get better. Technologies change, your application changes, because the nature of CI is really tied to your application. but we all have the same goals. The goals really don't change. And first of all, very obvious, we want to find bugs faster. The faster you squash the bug, the better the quality of application is in production, the happier your users. We also want a playground where we can test, we can fail forward, we can break things and not be afraid of doing that and impacting our users. So it's a safe place to go in and maybe do new things. Ideally, if your organization is advancing into the modern software delivery chain, you have the ability to do exploratory testing in somewhere, things that you were unable to do before. And also, we're moving testing earlier in the pipeline because quality is everybody's job. It's everybody's responsibility. It's not just the QA department. QAs are changing. They're morphing. And so we bring it earlier in the pipeline, which allows us to do all these things much sooner before it releases, it gets to production. There's several tools you need for the job. Infrastructure as code may not be the best term, but it's the fun term. Basically what I'm saying here is you need some sort of scripting tool because your infrastructure, your stack, has to be a part of the automation. You need a great release management tool. We're all familiar with Jenkins and how powerful that can be in the continuity of your pipeline. Because after all, if you are still in the process of chunking, I don't know if I necessarily believe in Agile. I actually think it's just really fast waterfall. So if you're still in the process of chunking, then you're not receiving the benefits of continuous integration. And then finally, you need automated testing and reporting tools. The reporting tools usually are an afterthought. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later because they really should not be. So first, we need to understand that CI is kind of been put in a poor position. It's the Cinderella story. And I say that because its sister processes, the CDs, delivery and deployment, have stolen the stage, right? They get to, if you're out on social media or you read a whole bunch of articles, that's what you hear about. And for some bottom-up organizations that have started driven by developers and have been built with the DevOps framework in mind right away, they can jump directly to delivery and deployment. But for other organizations who need to slipstream CI into the processes, you can start very small. And you don't need to just jump into everything. And so basically for those organizations, what that means is if you don't get CI right, you're not going to get the other stuff right. So you have to succeed here. And one of the other things, back to the definition, is it's far beyond just releases. We always think about faster releases, faster releases, faster releases. Well, that's great, and that's the end game, that's the result. But if you want to extend that and keep that environment for a long amount of time, then you need to consider the other things that come with CI. First off, it's the first line of defense. So developers hate bugs. Sometimes they get offended when you introduce one to them, which is too bad because it's their responsibility, but they really don't want to spend time addressing bugs. What developers really like to do is get new functionality out the door because it's exciting to know that the users are using new features and seeing the response. And so CI allows you to get to the fun stuff sooner. But the other thing, and we're going to talk about this in the next slide, is the people problem. The people problem we all want to avoid, the people problem that sometimes gets lumped with the term culture, and it seems kind of mushy. But naturally, integration environments bring everybody together. It's like the code cafe. And so by bringing everybody together in one location, there's better communication across QA and developers, and overall, everybody is collaborating together. It also helps us learn about the pipeline itself. So when your head's down coding and your head's down doing QA, sometimes you forget that there's this bigger holistic picture of things going on. And you should be measuring that as well. Like you measure your tests, you should be measuring your pipeline so that you know how to improve it over time, so that after a year of doing continuous integration, you can see we started out with this many bugs in production, and now we have this many less bugs in production, or maybe more, depending on the scenario. Hopefully it doesn't go in that direction. And then from the administration side, you have this idea of continuous documentation. Traditional documentation is dead, and that's fine because normally it was ad hoc and manual and usually just something you shoved into a drawer until you needed, but you hope you never did. But continuous documentation is free. It happens with your systems like Jenkins and Sauce Labs, and whatever the organization decides to do with that is up to them. But it's there, and it is a tremendous tool looking at extending the organization and boring things like change management and governance. And then finally, like I said before, for organizations that cannot just jump right into delivery and deployment, this is an onboarding for DevOps, even if you don't want to call it DevOps, because the reality here is that if you're interested in faster releases and higher quality, you are going to go in the direction of CI, whether you do it purposely or not. You are going to go that way, and you're going to look back and say, wow, we've kind of done this DevOps thing, and now we're ready to take the next steps. So with anything new, there are challenges. And if there weren't challenges, it wouldn't be fun because, after all, most of us techies like to tinker and we like to solve problems. And so we have a few problems we need to solve. The first one, again, is we're not all psychologists, and we also don't think that being a psychologist is part of our job description. But great processes and great technologies usually fail because of people, not the technologies themselves. And being as such, when we talk about culture, we are not talking about changing your title from whatever it is to adding ninja or rock star. That is not culture. Culture happens no matter what, whether you control it or not. You have a culture today. You don't need to identify it. It's there. It's out of your control. That's the point. If you can control culture, then it won't control you, and you can use it to determine the performance of the environment, to have less meetings, to waste less time chasing down bugs, to save people from searching down subject matter experts, which is always a huge drain of time. So once we have people, then we can start talking about the tactics. And the biggest tactic or thing that has to be addressed is servers, infrastructure. You have to deal with it. There's no choice. One of the misnomers about CI that I see is that people think it has to be one environment. CI is the process. So you can have multiple types of environments for multiple types of integration, testing, or whatever, which allows you to separate out those that you don't want to control and keep those on-prem that you do. And one of the most challenging of those is test grids. So inevitably, it almost takes a full-time employee to manage a test grid. And so what you want to do is maybe consider outsourcing that. Otherwise, what you're going to do is, by the nature of the infrastructure you use, you're going to limit your tests. You're actually determining by the server how many tests you're willing to run, which determines the operating system types that you're willing to test, the browsers that you're willing to test, and it's problematic. Plus, we all know that Selenium is slow, and in order to really leverage the power of faster tests so that we're not rerunning tests all the time, you want to run them in parallel. And then when you run them in parallel, everything goes a lot smoother. So the testing grid. Next is integration. If you don't have a continuous flow of code, then you do not have a DevOps pipeline, which means that you can't have manual steps between each stages. So you need a tool, which is a release automation tool, to tie it all together and have the visual of your entire pipeline. And then finally, one of the big challenges around infrastructure is contamination. Ideally, the dream scenario is that every time you do a release of the entire stack. You don't just release onto existing servers, which could have been polluted from previous tests. Because chasing down those types of bugs that cross code and configuration are extremely difficult. So you need to avoid contamination. And then finally, we forget about the overall pipeline, and we need to consider that. In order for organizations to truly be results-driven, they can't just be heads down. It has to be holistic. You have to look at the quality of your pipeline. You have to look at where your bottlenecks are so that you can address them. And that can only be done with metrics. That can only be done with dashboards that tell you what is going on. I know a lot of us love everything scripted, and all you want to do is look at a text editor all day and run terminal commands. That's cool. But at some point in time, you have to see the impact of that automation and what's going on. Now, the great news, all of these solutions exist, or solutions to all of these problems exist, and they can be addressed. And now I get to show you, actually I won't show you, Abhijit and Andy will show you, but we get to see two tools that tie in and address these challenges. So I'm going to hand it over to Abhijit. I'll be back in a little bit to talk about the future, and then we'll go into QA. All right, Abhijit, take it away.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was an excellent overview. And hello, everybody. Very good morning to all of you. So I'm just going to quickly share my desktop here and introduce you to the Sauce Labs jobs page, or the Sauce Labs homepage. For those who are not familiar with Sauce Labs, essentially Sauce Labs is a cloud platform where we offer the largest grid for executing Selenium as well as Appium tests. We have close to 490 plus browser and OS combinations, including mobile platforms that you can run your tests on. And all those tests are run through an API endpoint. So essentially, if you have an existing Selenium or an Appium test suite set up, or if you're looking to set one up, all you have to do, or the change you'll have to make, is change the Selenium server URL to point to Sauce Labs, and you'll be running your tests on a Selenium server in the cloud. Right. Along with automation testing, you can also run manual tests. Since Chris did mention earlier that manual tests is essentially not going away, but it'll still be part of the CI pipe. Essentially, Sauce Labs solves or provides you a platform to do your functional testing using manual or an automated flow. All right. So how would a simple CI flow or continuous integration pipe look on when you're running tests on Sauce Labs? So let's take a very simple example. Definitely we can get into further complexities, and there'll be various use cases for it. But for now, we'll just take a look at a very simple application, which is essentially allowing us to book a flight from a certain location and allowing us to buy the ticket by choosing a certain flight, entering our information, and then purchasing it, right? And usually this application code will reside either on a local repository or in a cloud service. In our simple use case, the application code is residing on GitHub, right? And here, as you see, there's the application code here. As part of the code itself, I have a Selenium script, right? And it's a simple script written in Ruby. And since I'm going to be running this test on Sauce Labs against this application, I have the advantage of running on multiple platforms in parallel, right? So as you can see from my script here, I have close to 8 different browser and OS combinations that I've specified that I want to run a test on, right? And essentially, what I'm testing is the same exact logic a user may execute on my application, right? Essentially, purchasing a ticket, right? So I have my test as part of the application code, and and to do the CI flow, I'm using Jenkins, right? It's a local instance of Jenkins in this use case, but of course, there are CloudBees offer the cloud instance of Jenkins, so you really don't have to download Jenkins server onto your laptop or your machine itself, right? And for Jenkins, Sauce Labs also has a plugin, so you can leverage that plugin to kick off tests on Sauce Labs. But in this case, we're just going to simply kick off the test on Sauce Labs from the script itself. All right. So going back to the script here, as I mentioned, it's really this API URL that needs to be plugged in to show to run a test on Sauce Labs. So if you have an existing Selenium script or an Appium script, it may be pointing to a local Selenium instance, right? But the URL parameter now will then point to Sauce Labs, and that's the only change you'll need to do. Apart from, of course, adding other platforms that your users may access the application on. But for now, I'll be running a test against my flight application. So let's go back to Sauce Labs dashboard. Before I do run a test, I want to introduce you to the dashboard so that when we kick off a test, you will know what you're looking at, essentially, right? So on the dashboard, you see that there are 3 different columns here. And what Sauce Labs does is segments out the kind of tests you run on Sauce, right? So if you run a manual test, they'll show up in this column. If you run an automated test, they'll show up here. And if you run any tests as part of the build, they will show up in here. Also, we have an archives page that allows you to take a look at all the tests that you have run and do some sorting and filtering and all of those things as well. But for now, let's go ahead and kick off a build that is testing or a new functionality that has been added to this application, right? So the automated flow would be that a developer would push a code to try to commit a code to the application. As part of that push, there will be a build process that will kick off to verify and validate whether certain tests pass against that new change. And if those tests do pass, then that change is committed, right? In this simple use case, we are going to be building or we're going to be kicking off the build process manually, right? So I have set up a Jenkins job here that says, okay, a Sauce Labs CI demo. And as part of my Jenkins job, I've configured certain parameters that what should be ran as part of that build, right? So if a change is made to the application, what tests need to be run, right? In this case, we'll be running our Selenium test. And since the Selenium test is going to be run on Sauce Labs, Jenkins will make that test actually run, and then we'll see those jobs spawn on Sauce Labs here. So I've kicked off the build, and there you see all those different browser and OS combinations that I highlighted in the script. All of them are now running the logic of my test, right? And essentially, I can click into any of these jobs here and see the execution of the test real time, right? So essentially, the VMs spin up really quickly within 4 to 5 seconds, and our test was a short test. It took only 24 or 31 seconds in this case to finish. But once it's done, what Sauce Labs does is creates a video of the entire test for you. So right now, what we're watching is the video of the test, where we are entering the user's details into the purchase page, and then we're going to click on purchase flight, and then we'll get a confirmation of the flight, of the purchase. Not only that, For each page element execution that happens as part of the test, Sauce Labs takes an automatic screenshot as well. So fetching the URL, we took a screenshot. Entering a certain text or any element interaction, we captured that action. Also, as part of the debugging assets, along with the screenshots, the videos, we have a Selenium log as well as the browser log. And these are really helpful to discern what kind of calls are being made back and forth in the Selenium server and the application. And then there's a metadata page that'll give you further information about the Selenium session itself and if the build was tagged or named and what were the base configurations and any custom data was sent across as part of the test itself. Now, you may have noticed that when we kicked off the test, this dial here on the left-hand side that says concurrent VMs went to 8. So we ran 8 different VMs in parallel, essentially 8 different browser and OS combinations running the same test in parallel. And the concurrency is really the limit of the concurrency that we subscribe to is really the limit of running tests on Sauce Labs. Many of our customers run close to 1,000 tests in a single build. And what this also does, it gives you an insight into how your application is behaving on a certain platform, right? So you will see for the same test on Windows 8.1 and i11, it took 31 seconds. But on the other hand, on Mac OS 10.9, it takes 22 seconds. Why the discrepancy? And you want to make sure that your application is optimized across all platforms. Not to say this is not, but this is just an example that in case you see a test running for a minute instead of 30 seconds on the platform, you can dig in further with the assets that Sauce Labs provides to you to discern which element is taking longer to load and where the major bottleneck is. Right? So having said that, I will pass this over to Andy, who will be introducing us to CloudBees, a cloud platform for Jenkins. Thank you.
Thank you, Abhijit. Hi, everybody. This is Andy Pemberton from CloudBees. As Ken mentioned, I run a team at CloudBees called our Solution Architecture team. And so what we do is we focus on helping customers understand DevOps as a trend, continuous delivery, and how Jenkins and Jenkins Enterprise, which is CloudBees' primary offering, sort of fits into the mix. And sort of educating customers on the platform. So, my section here is about taking the next step, and I think it's an interesting conversation because, I think Chris and Abhijit spoke really well to continuous integration and how extending into testing is really a game changer. It's really changed the industry in a lot of new ways, created a new industry even. There are new tools and technologies and vendors in the DevOps space. So it's a very exciting place to be. I feel very fortunate to be able to do this all day, having come from an industry background and consulting, doing a lot of the same types of work. But it's definitely changed how companies, both from the unicorn-like startups all the way to big financial services companies and more traditional insurance companies, et cetera, the way they deliver software. So I think it's interesting. What is the next step? To me, to even ask the question, it's an interesting question because I don't think there's just one. DevOps is definitely a journey. There are many steps along the way. So, it's not like there's a very simple, we've got our functional testing automated, let's move on to continuous delivery. There are many ways to move forward, and I think it's all about being pragmatic. I'm a big believer in, the pragmatic programmer style, and I'm sort of an agilista. So I think, each organization needs to find, the right step on the journey to take for them based on bang for the buck and how will it help that organization move forward. But to that end, every journey needs a guide. So for those who don't know, I'll introduce you to Jenkins. I saw in the poll results there a lot of folks seem to be using Jenkins today, which we love to see. Just like Selenium and the folks at Sauce Labs, I'm a big believer in open source. And so I work for CloudBees. We're the enterprise Jenkins company. So Jenkins as a platform is open source. There's over 1,000 plugins that help integrate Jenkins to other tools like Sauce Labs to be able to run your Selenium tests in the cloud. So it's open source, and there's a very thriving ecosystem with a lot of use cases really all over the world. We're still discovering just how many folks use Jenkins. It's actually really exciting and interesting. It's almost an interesting phenomenon. It was originally started by a guy named Kosuke Kawaguchi, who is now the CTO of CloudBees. And so we're very instrumentally involved both in the community and also in providing sort of an enterprise commercial offering around the open source project. So you get support and enterprise features from CloudBees for Jenkins. So I think this is an interesting story. Recently, someone asked me to do a talk, for a particular company, and they asked, hey, could you kind of describe the state of DevOps without Jenkins? What does that look like? How are people doing, DevOps and automating builds at companies if they don't have Jenkins? And I think this image sums it up pretty well. It's a dark place to be. It's a dark, desolate road, and you don't want to be there. Ant scripts and shell scripts galore. I worked in one shop where MyEclipse was required for production builds, and WinZip was also an essential component of the process. So we certainly don't want you to be there. We believe that life is much better with Jenkins. So life with Jenkins is a happy road. And as I mentioned, Jenkins is a great guide on your DevOps journey. Because of that integration approach and the really well-built and well-tested integration points with Jenkins, we really do believe that Jenkins is a great guide for folks as they move along this journey because, the chances are that if you want to use a new tool in your build chain, to help you release software faster, or meet whatever goals you have, or with higher quality, for example, it's very likely that someone out there in the world is already integrating that tool with Jenkins. And we'll talk more about that, how Jenkins is really an automation platform more than anything else. So we'll come back to that in just a minute. So as far as the next step goes, for me, I don't want to move immediately into this continuous delivery conversation. I talk to customers every day. I'm a software engineer by heart. I do team management and talks and other things today, but I'm a software engineer by heart. I still write code. I still commit to Jenkins and a number of plugins and things like that. I don't want to bypass testing itself. And so our friends at Sauce Labs are very passionate about the functional testing space, but as far as the next step goes, there's a huge opportunity for most companies today to further their efforts in automation across this spectrum of testing that I've laid out here. So beginning to use Jenkins for more than your unit and integration tests, but into things like static code analysis tools. We talk with companies about Sonar and Coverity and a lot of other tools quite frequently, but security testing is absolutely huge for more traditional companies. Similarly, functional testing, as our friends at Sauce Labs really do for a living. I don't want to understate just how impactful this can be to a company's bottom line, not just, because time is money, and if you're helping me decrease my time to market, then Sauce Labs will help you make more money. And similarly with CloudBees and our Jenkins Enterprise offering. So when you go on to look at things like performance testing and continuously testing the performance of your application, and even finally at the far end of the spectrum, which tend to take the most time and resources and thus money to run, we have system tests. So these are your traditionally human-run, end-to-end test script style tests that as Chris alluded to, and I think he's right, many companies will still do manually for quite a long time. This is a really passionate topic for me because I don't want to understate that I really believe that testing is the hardest part of the DevOps journey, and so that's why we really believe in our partnership with Sauce Labs folks. And similarly, with other folks and vendors across the spectrum. So, but beyond that, you have probably heard of, this continuous delivery buzz. So I think that, after companies do take some time and look at the testing spectrum, I think that continuous delivery is absolutely a great place to look. And many of our customers, I'm fortunate enough to say that we actually do work with some of the unicorns out there. So some of the the Phoenix Project style unicorn companies who really do commit code and leave their desk and the code goes to production. We're fortunate to call some of those folks customers. But of course, maturity along that scale is a spectrum. And it's some of those capabilities don't make sense for certain types of more traditional companies. But continuous delivery as a trend and as, let's call it, a discipline, to me it's really about taking that same automation focus that the team at Sauce Labs walked us through, a great demo, thanks to Abhijit, about automating functional tests with the Selenium platform and doing that in a remote way on the cloud that would save you from having to stand up this crazy matrix of browsers and mobile app platforms. Continuous delivery kind of takes the automation focus to new areas. So up that testing spectrum and across silos. What I mean by that is, and I'm sure many folks hopefully on the webinar would agree with me, that many companies today still have a lot of different teams and departments and work intake forms and user story templates and requirements spreadsheets and various ways that you have to work within a big company to get lots of these types of things done. So what we're seeing is that continuous delivery really, even just on that testing spectrum I shared with you all, really sort of challenges a lot of these traditional silos and departmental boundaries, or stresses them, I should say. And ultimately to the release and deployment teams. So if you look at DevOps, right, it's a moniker of uniting the dev teams with the ops teams. Ultimately, and as Chris alluded to, ultimately it leads to a place where you're really treating your software development lifecycle as a pipeline itself. You're starting to visualize all of these teams and all these silos. And how you can automate, basically, how do I get software source code out the door to production as a binary? And, we think that Jenkins has a huge place here. And I can see a lot of folks thinking, and I talk to companies every day about, hey, wait, isn't Jenkins a CI tool? Our website for the open source project is jenkinsci.org. CloudBees is at cloudbees.com. But Jenkins isn't a continuous integration tool, but it's not a continuous delivery tool either. This is what I was alluding to earlier. Jenkins is really an automation tool. And, the code base originally started, around 10 years ago under a different project name at the time. And the industry at the time was really thinking of CI jobs, a very job-focused view of the world. But now the industry and the Jenkins community has started using Jenkins for continuous delivery. So one of the absolutely the best parts, the strengths of Jenkins is its community and the fact that, Jenkins as a tool goes where the community goes. And so the community is moving towards CD, and so Jenkins is moving to CD because it's, a massively used and massively contributed to open source project. So, but it hasn't always been an easy road for CD, for Jenkins, because it's really evolved organically. And so it took a number of open source plugins, and, it was a little bit of a choppy road in the early days of CD. So, CloudBees has decided, hey, as a company, we care deeply about Jenkins, and for us to be successful with Jenkins Enterprise, Jenkins Open Source has to be successful. So what we decided to do was contribute a lot of our time and energy last year to a feature called Jenkins Workflow. And so hopefully you see here on the screen exactly what Chris mentioned just a bit ago. So visualizing your full build process as a pipeline, from build to unit testing to functional testing with tools like Sauce Labs and Selenium on into various of your deployment gates. So CloudBees has helped deliver this functionality called Jenkins Workflow that is really a Groovy-based syntax, as Chris mentioned, infrastructure as code. So your Jenkins build jobs can now become simple Groovy scripts. and there's a DSL, a domain-specific language for writing these Jenkins scripts that is specific to all of the terms that Jenkins people already know about. So things like checking out code to build a workspace, as you see in this example, or calling shell steps to execute command line tools, as you see here. But as you see highlighted in green here, this very clearly shows how you would integrate a tool like Sauce Labs. So for this example, it actually was real, though I wish Abhijit and I had been able to connect our two demos together. For this example, what I'm really doing is just calling an external Sauce Labs project. Honestly, I could have called Abhijit's. And I also wanted to show a specific syntax there. It says input message, did the sauce test pass? And it shows a role definition there. So these are the types of things that CloudBees is helping do for Jenkins. We understand that most companies will still need what that is. For the untrained eye, that's a manual pause. It's a manual request for input from a human. We certainly didn't have to wire that into our script, but we do understand that most companies, would still need some of those types of manual gates along the way. So, but with Jenkins workflow, and in particular the enterprise extensions that I'll mention in just a minute that CloudBees has added, you can do things like add that manual steps, but to the same pipeline. So it's an automated pipeline that supports manual steps that even better has security into things like your enterprise Active Directory or LDAP infrastructure so that you know who is making those types of approvals and, allowing, for example, the script to proceed to a deployment step. So true to form, CloudBees as a company, we thrive off the open source project, but we often, we'll build enterprise extensions to that project. So in this case, the workflow visualization component that you saw on the screen just a few minutes ago. We have a feature called checkpoints that's part of our Jenkins Enterprise offering. And finally, the ability to build templated workflows. So let's say you get a 14-step delivery pipeline built just the way you like it, calling Sauce Labs at just the right time. With Jenkins Enterprise by CloudBees, you'd be able to easily create a template of that pipeline and then, for example, build additional web applications or mobile apps through the exact same series of steps. Essentially, plugging in parameterized attributes as you needed to. So hopefully that helps give you an overview of sort of CloudBees' take on next steps, after you start to automate some of these types of tests, where you may take it from there. I'll just close out to say I also really appreciate the opportunity to speak with everybody today. As I said, I can't say enough how excited we are to partner with Sauce Labs and to talk about how using Jenkins Enterprise and Sauce Labs together can really help, like I said, impact the bottom line for a lot of companies that we work with. So you see on the screen here a couple of the other features that we have as part of our offering. As Abhijit mentioned, we both have a public cloud platform and our Jenkins Enterprise offering for companies who run Jenkins within their infrastructure. We also have a series of management tools for Jenkins in a product called Jenkins Operations Center that gives you additional visibility, analytics, and dashboards, and a number of other things like that. So from here, I think I'm going to pass it, Chris, back over to you to talk about the future.
Great. Cool. Thank you. So your homework, if you have not already done it, is to take the great technology seen today, put them all together, have that CI environment that you're whittling away at and making even more comprehensive. But I'm going to quickly talk about the extra credit. Food for thought, where you can take this even further, and it applies to both. It applies to the entire chain, integration, delivery, and deployment as well. So the first thing that I've been seeing is, instead of pipelines of code, is an interesting idea of pipelines of containers. So basically, what you're moving is containers. Your deployment is containers. So everything in your flow is driven by these container images. The next thing is very similar to that, and I am impressed because this is not new, but I don't see a lot of organizations doing it, is every build laying out the entire stack of your infrastructure. If it's on Sauce Labs, it's done for you which is awesome. But you shouldn't be reusing VMs and images and so forth to deploy your code. You really want to send out the entire stack. And I know this has a lot of implications on infrastructure, but these are throwaway environments. So they might only live for an hour, but it gives sandboxes that allow you to do a lot more and avoid all the contamination issues. The next one is mock environments. I really like this. It does not allow you to do a full end-to-end testing, a mock environment. A mock environment is basically the front end with no back end. And the responses, you have to build it, and it requires a really nice API or really structured API. But the response of the back end is immediate. So there is no delay. So when you run your Selenium test, it's much, much faster. You're not waiting for the database to come back. It's nice to have this as a part of your really quick, regular, ongoing testing, and let's call it a mini integration environment for your front end. And then finally, aligned with that, you can take mock environments any further by adding service virtualization. So this one's a little bit harder to describe, but everybody's application has some unit, some product, and it's hard to replicate those products so that you can test against real things that users would create. And there's a lot of interesting ways to do this. One is to basically record common use cases and use that as your source data in testing, whether, I don't know, I've been doing a lot with prototyping environments, whether it's a prototype and you have prototypes existing in your test environment that you can run your test against instead of trying to interpolate what it is. It's a big topic. Like DevOps, it's evolving, somewhat of a moving target, but it's an interesting thing to be aware of. So great. I think that Abhijit, Andy totally killed the topics here, and I appreciate everybody coming today. Now we have the opportunity to address some of your questions if we have not already. So I'll hand it back over to Ken.
Great. Thanks, Chris. And Andy, Abhijit, yeah, we got a number of questions that had come in and not a lot of time, so we'll start with a few of these. Chris, this might be a good one for you initially, is how does continuous delivery differ from continuous deployment?
Yeah. Oops, sorry, I saw that as well. And Andy, I think will know this as well. You know, some might say there isn't a difference at all. It's very small, but it's not trivial. So in terms of the technology you use, they're both the same technology. One, delivery is up to production. So there's still a manual step of after all the tests have been run, you press the go button, and then it goes into production. Deployment is straight to production. And the reason it's not trivial is if you do continuous deployment, then you need to make sure that you have all of the revert functionality, the A/B testing, all of the other stuff required to make sure that once it goes to deployment, if something bad happens, you can go back quickly and address it. Annie, I think you probably have some thoughts on that as well.
Oh, sure. Yeah, thanks, Chris. I mean, this is a very, the industry has terms, right? And so sometimes the terms mean something very specific, and sometimes they don't. So I guess the first way I would answer this is whenever I have a conversation about these topics, I always like to ground it to make sure that you're sharing vernacular and you're referring to things the same way. It's because it's always tough. But the way I think about it and the way we tend to talk about it is continuous deployment. For me, really hones in on exactly that deployment. So when I'm having continuous deployment conversations, I tend to talk a lot about deployment vendors and containerization, the containerization trend and the impact there, and also I guess I'd say software configuration management, so the Puppet and Shifts of the world. Continuous delivery, though, I think is the broader industry term for testing, continuous testing, service virtualization, continuous deployment, continuous integration, quality testing. So, I mean, that's the way we tend to slice it. But again, these are oft-debated terms in the industry. So as much as it's valuable to have those types of debates.
Great, thanks. There's a question about mobility. As we all know, everyone is looking at developing more and more mobile applications, and these tend to be very short-lived, kind of quick turns. Could you give some advice to people on how CI helps in the development of mobile apps? Maybe, Andy, you can start.
Sure, I will. I used to do that very thing for a living for a large bank here in the U.S., a top 5 bank in the U.S. And mobility is huge, but for DevOps is huge for mobile projects. But it's actually a little different than you think. For most mobile projects that I've worked on, the end gate is at the end. There's always a manual step, and it's usually Apple or Google. So it's funny because we talk so much about continuous delivery, but we also talk about mobile apps eating the world, and mobile apps have this big built-in manual gated step, at least for consumer-facing apps on these public app marketplaces. That said, I think the benefits are, to me that almost goes to show you that, look, the endless pursuit of removing all manual steps is probably fruitless. You should really prioritize the work that's most beneficial to your team. What I found particularly helpful when I was doing mobile types of projects was automating the release of those applications to our QA testing platform, so through tools like TestFlight and things like that. And also, and I think my friends at Sauce Labs will love me for this, I was a very early adopter of the Appium framework for doing Selenium-style testing of our mobile applications. So I think the benefits are huge, at least in that regard. I don't know, Chris, or Abhijit, if you feel differently, or...
No, I think mentioning the gate is really, really interesting. I think there's, like you said, it is different. So there's other elements, like there's ways to test the back end and the front end slightly separately. But I think, Abhijit, there's also an interesting idea around physical devices versus emulators and where you do your functional testing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. In mobile, it's an ongoing discussion where emulators fit in and physical device fit in, and it's a polarizing issue that I've seen so far. But yeah, absolutely. There is a manual component to mobile testing, and Appium does alleviate some of the pain points. But again, when you have to go through a vendor-locked certification process, achieving the utopia of mobile CI, I think it's the final line still needs to be written on that.
Thanks. There's another question here. I think this relates to people trying to move to CI/CD. And the question is, how does CI help maintenance of small applications when the cost of maintaining CI is a bit high? So it sounds like, as people try and start to get involved in this, there's an initial amount of work that has to be done to set up a continuous integration process. Maybe, Chris, you want to take a stab at that?
I do. I'll quickly hand this over to Andy as well. But I think, there's a difference. Like, there's the big idea, CI. We need to do CI. But there's also, let's just automate something. Just find something and automate it. And if you can, hopefully the effort around that is small. The human resources, the effort around that is small, but it creates the foundation for automating more. So you get to do it over time, and it's what I call slipstreaming. But at the same time, one of the biggest costs is the infrastructure. And so going out and hunting down infrastructure that is pre-built throwaway environments that is already ready for you to go is a good way to mitigate the cost of the infrastructure, but also the maintenance of the infrastructure, because I really think that is where the biggest cost, even though it doesn't seem like it, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And so if you can avoid those infrastructure annoying stuff, that's great.
Yeah, from the Jenkins side, I would answer that question, Ken, by saying, we really try to make Jenkins as easy to use as possible. And in fact, a lot of companies get mad at us for it because, Jenkins springs up under desks, and, they have way more instances of it than they realize. Running Jenkins is as simple as downloading a WAR file and typing. It's self-executable, so you type Java jar Jenkins.war. and it starts going. So, from our view, getting up and going with Jenkins is really easy. But the gentleman's question absolutely rings true to me, which is basically, hey, if I don't see an immediate return, how much time is it worth investing? I think in the long run, no matter how big your project, software projects never die. Right? The average lifetime of software in production, even for a mobile app, actually it's particularly challenging for mobile apps because you don't necessarily know when customers will remove that client application from their phone and things like that. So I think that they're probably going to live a little longer than you think, and unless you're in tight control environment. So I think that, at least the regular focus on scripting and automation and infrastructure as code should be there. And of course for us, running it on Jenkins is certainly a must from my worldview, but I'm a little biased there.
All right. Well, Andy, Chris, Abhijit, we're at the top of the hour, so I think we'll have to cut this off. I want to remind everyone who has listened today that we'll be sending out a copy of the recording and a link to the slides within about a day or two from now, so you'll be able to share that with your colleagues as well. Thanks, everyone, for joining today, and that's the end of our event.